You almost certainly have a Spirit Airlines story. Maybe it is the bright yellow jet that looked like a flying highlighter parked at the far end of the terminal. Maybe it is the seat that would not recline, the tray table the size of a paperback, the surprise charge for the carry-on bag you were sure you were allowed to bring. Maybe it is a gate agent's voice announcing one more delay to a city you only picked because the fare was somehow $39. For more than a decade, Spirit was the airline America loved to make fun of, the punchline in every group chat about a trip gone wrong, the butt of 1,000 jokes told at Thanksgiving. But the jokes never costed a thing. People kept booking it anyway. Those loud yellow planes flew packed, season after season, stuffed with the same travelers who swore on their lives they would never fly Spirit again. It was the most mocked airline in the country, and for years one of the most profitable. Then, this spring, every one of those yellow planes stopped flying for good. So what actually killed it? The easy answer, the one you may have reached already, is that people finally got tired of being nickeled and dimed and simply walked away. That answer is wrong. Spirit did not collapse because America hated it. The packed cabins settled that argument a long time ago. It collapsed because the one genuinely clever idea it was built on, the rock-bottom fare with everything else stripped out and sold back to you one piece at a time, stopped belonging to Spirit. The enormous airlines it had undercut and embarrassed for years quietly copied the trick, started selling their own bare-bones seats, and erased the single advantage Spirit ever had. A blocked merger and a fleet of crippled jets only decided how fast the ending would come. The airline everybody pictures as a punchline did not begin in the sky at all. It began on the road. In 1964, the company that would eventually become Spirit started life as a small Michigan trucking outfit, hauling freight, not people. It was not until 1983 that an entrepreneur named Ned Humfeld turned it into a charter operation out of Detroit, flying package tours to Atlantic City and Las Vegas and the Bahamas. And it was only in 1992, when the company finally brought in real jets and began scheduled flights, that it took the name travelers would come to know, and to dread, and to book anyway. Spirit Airlines. For its first decade and a half as Spirit, it was an unremarkable low-fare carrier, one of many. The transformation, the thing that made it infamous, arrived after 2006, when a private investment firm called Indigo Partners took control, and a sharp executive named Ben Baldanza took the controls. Baldanza looked across the Atlantic at Ryanair, the Irish carrier that had turned brutal cheapness into an art form, and decided to build the American version. The plan was simple and a little ruthless. Advertise the lowest fare anyone had ever seen, strip the ticket down to nothing but a seat, and then charge for every single thing that used to come free. And they charged for everything. A bag in the overhead bin, a printed boarding pass at the counter, a bottle of water, a seat assignment next to the person you were traveling with. In 2010, Spirit became the first airline in America to charge passengers for a carry-on bag at all. A move so loathed it triggered angry headlines and a fight in the United States Senate, and one Spirit was happy to absorb because the outrage was free advertising. The airline went public in 2011. In 2014, it painted its fleet a shade of taxicab yellow that was impossible to ignore and stamped its no-frills philosophy right on the side, calling it the bare fare. The strategy, for all the mockery, worked spectacularly. Spirit grew into the largest ultra-low-cost carrier in the United States. By 2019, it was flying more than 33 million passengers a year, and roughly half of every dollar it took in came not from the fare printed on the ticket, but from the pile of fees stacked on top of it. The most hated airline in America was also, quietly, one of the best in the entire industry at turning a profit. For a while, being the cheapest name on the departures board was a fortress all its own. No legacy carrier wanted to be associated with Spirit's bargain basement reputation, and so for years the giants left the very bottom of the market alone. Then they noticed how much money was hiding down there in all those fees, and they decided they wanted it. The counterattack had a name: Basic Economy. As early as 2012, Delta began testing a stripped-down, no-frills fare, and it was blunt about the target. The cheap seat was built specifically to compete with Spirit. By the middle of the decade, Delta was selling it in dozens of markets where the two airlines went head-to-head, and by 2017 it had spread the fare across its entire domestic map. United and American scrambled to follow with bare fares of their own. All at once, a traveler could buy a rock-bottom ticket on a big, comfortable, full-service airline with a real loyalty program and a far better chance the flight left on time for close to what Spirit was charging. That was the whole game, and Spirit had just lost it. Its one weapon, the shockingly low headline fare, was now sitting on every airline's website. The government would later give this ripple effect a name in court, the Spirit effect, an acknowledgement that the airline's mere existence had dragged prices down across the country. But that was exactly the trap. Once everyone had copied the cheap seat, there was no longer much reason to put up with the yellow plane to get one. The fees the legacy carriers raked in per passenger crept up toward Spirit's own. The moat had been quietly filled in, then the wider world landed a heavier blow. When the pandemic hit in 2020, air travel simply stopped, and an airline that ran on thin margins and full cabins had no cushion for empty ones. Spirit lost hundreds of millions of dollars in a single year. Travel eventually came roaring back, but it came back changed. Fuel cost more, labor cost more, as pilots and flight attendants won big raises across the industry, and the budget travelers Spirit depended on were now being courted head-on by Delta and United and American. A business model built entirely on being a few dollars cheaper than everyone else cannot survive the moment everyone else gets just as cheap. By the early 2020s, Spirit could feel the walls drawing in, and it went looking for an escape. What it found was a merger, and then it watched a federal judge take that escape away. In February of 2022, Spirit agreed to merge with Frontier, another ultra-low-cost carrier, a deal that would have fused them into a single budget airline big enough to fight the giants on scale. But before that wedding could happen, JetBlue crashed it. JetBlue launched an unsolicited higher offer for Spirit, and a bidding war broke out. Every time Frontier and Spirit settled on terms, JetBlue came back with more money, until the Frontier deal collapsed, and in July of 2022, Spirit agreed to sell itself to JetBlue for around $3.8 billion. There was a fatal catch buried in that deal. A JetBlue that swallowed Spirit would have ripped out Spirit's cramped seats, raised its fares, and erased the cheapest airline in the country. And that was precisely the outcome the federal government refused to allow. In March of 2023, the Justice Department sued to block the merger, arguing it would punish the very cost-conscious travelers who depended on Spirit's low fares. The case went to trial, and in January of 2024, a federal judge agreed and struck the merger down. Weeks later, JetBlue walked away for good. Now the buyer was gone, the lifeline was cut, and Spirit had been handed back its independence at the exact moment independence had become a death sentence. Flew an all-Airbus fleet powered by a new generation of Pratt Whitney engines. And those engines turned out to carry a manufacturing flaw that forced airlines to pull them off the wing for long inspections. Because Spirit's entire fleet leaned on them, it was hit harder than almost anyone. By the end of 2024, dozens of Spirit's jets, planes the airline was still making payments on, were sitting grounded on the tarmac, unable to earn a cent. A company already bleeding could not even fly all the aircraft it owned. A quick word before the last act. If you have ever watched a company you were certain was too big to vanish, do exactly that. Pulling these stories apart one at a time is the whole reason this channel exists, so hit subscribe, and the next one will find its way to you. What happened over the next 18 months was not a slow decline. It was a controlled demolition. In November of 2024, with the merger dead and the losses piling up, Spirit filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The plan was the familiar one: shed some debt, reorganize, and keep flying. It converted roughly $800 million of what it owed into ownership stakes for its lenders, and it was thrown off the New York Stock Exchange. In March of 2025, after about 4 months, Spirit emerged from bankruptcy and announced a fresh start. The fresh start lasted barely 5 months. Every force that had pushed it under the first time, the vanished fare advantage, the grounded engines, the relentless cost of fuel and labor, was all still there waiting. By August of 2025, with one of its biggest aircraft lessors tearing up leases and its cash draining away, Spirit filed for Chapter 11 a second time, less than a year after the first. This time it fought harder and slid faster. It cut dozens of routes, slashed its fleet, and furloughed thousands of workers, trying to shrink its way back to safety. It very nearly made it. By early 2026, Spirit had reached a deal with its creditors and a narrow path to come out the other side intact. And then the one thing it could not absorb arrived. Jet fuel prices spiked sharply in the spring of 2026, and for an airline with no reserves left, that was the whole difference between barely surviving and not surviving at all. Spirit made a final plea for an emergency federal rescue, asking Washington for around $500 million just to keep the planes in the air. The rescue never came. In the early hours of the 2nd of May, 2026, at 3 a.m. Eastern Time, Spirit Airlines permanently shut down. Around 17,000 people lost their jobs in a single night. A fleet of about 114 yellow Airbus jets was grounded for the last time. Roughly 50,000 passengers had been booked to fly Spirit that final day, and they woke to canceled flights and dark terminals, scrambling for any seat home. Rival airlines, including the very giants that had helped bury it, capped their fares and flew the stranded travelers out. The most hated airline in America died, and its competitors carried the mourners to the airport. So what remains of Spirit now? On the ground, very little. The jets it actually owned will be sold off for whatever they will bring. The parts and the remaining hours of life turned into cash to hand the creditors. The leased ones go back to the companies that owned them, ready to be repainted in some other airline's colors. The bright yellow is already vanishing from the sky, but the real legacy of Spirit is not in a boneyard. It is on the booking screen of every airline you will ever use again. Spirit did not just fail. It won, and then it died of its own victory. It taught American travelers to chase the lowest possible number on the screen, taught them to expect a seat and nothing else, and trained an entire industry to break a single ticket into a dozen little fees. Every time you book a basic economy fare on a major airline today and discover you have to pay extra to pick a seat or carry a bag, you are flying inside the world Spirit built. The Pioneer was copied so completely that the copies finally made the original unnecessary. And there is a colder lesson underneath it, the one that should worry anyone who liked a cheap flight. The scrappy competitor that forced fares down for 20 years is gone now, and the giants left standing have far less reason to keep the cheapest seats cheap. Which leaves just one question, now that the yellow planes are gone for good. What was your Spirit story? Were you one of the millions who rolled their eyes at that flying highlighter and booked it anyway because the fare was simply too low to walk past? Did the carry-on charge get you? The seat that would not lean back? The delay you still bring up at parties? And now that the cheapest seat in the American sky has been switched off for good, do you think you will quietly miss it the next time you are staring at a fare twice the size you remember? Tell me your Spirit story in a comment. The good, the bad, and the genuinely unforgivable.